I was born in a city named Opole, southern Poland, with over 120,000 inhabitants now. Quite small, actually. And it's sort of an important thing, the shape of Opole, because I was living in a region where it needed to pass through a barren part of vegetation to get to this central part of the city where my school was and all that stuff. And actually I fell in love with walking through this area. That was my daily way to school. And this is connected also with the fact of my acquaintance with music, because we used to do those compact magnetic cassettes with Walkmans. That was called Walkmans, and I put my headphones on and I was listening to the very, very large array of music. Classical music was the one that I sort of grew up with, very tightly connected to this aesthetic, but at the same time, at the age of all these like 12 years, the early teenage, I was probably that's sort of normal. I was interested in like almost every kind of music that was available this time, starting with what is now called world music, through all these rock bands that you fall in love at the very young age, and then you keep loving it till the like now. Like for example, Dire Straits. I can truly say that's my beloved group, touching some sort of heavy metal stuff on one hand, and on the other hand some ethnic or religious music from Orthodox Church. It's like I was actually, I think from now, looking backwards, I think I was searching for different kinds of, actually it was about atmosphere. So what I needed in terms of my mood, an actual mood, I used to provide to myself with the music. That's why I have got all these magnetic tapes with me, and it was like heavy metal here, and Tchaikovsky here, Brahms here, and all that stuff, and I was just choosing what I needed. And that was my phonosphere, so to speak, at the young age. And I think it actually sort of, this is the way I took shape in terms of what sort of attitude I have now for music, because of course we can say that this is like a classical composer is what I am, but it's not only what we call a traditional classical music I'm interested in, and I can still say that there's a whole variety of musical so to say, stimuli I need during the day, as I start with Dire Straits again, and I finish my day with contemporary music, totally different from anything else. So actually, this world was settled as very different in itself, and it actually remained this way. When I started writing music, it's quite, actually, it's not very clear for me to say, because my father was, and my mother, they were musicians too, and my father also, part of his work was, he actually played sort of a pop music as well. And I grew up also listening to some, we can say hits, the 80s hits, and I attributed this sort of music as well. One of my youngling's dreams was to play the pop music as well, and I did have some likings in it. And it's not the very moment I started writing music, but this is sort of a moment I decided that I have to create in some way. And I remember my instrument that I was practicing that time was violin. After I grew up a little taller, I changed to viola. But I was quite interested in playing guitar, and I started playing guitar as well, of course, as alongside piano improvisation. It was always a main part of my dreaming of performing music. Actually, it's totally invalid now. Performing is not what I do. And I asked myself whether I can actually start playing guitar, and I started. I asked for a guitar as a birthday gift, and I remember my dad brought this to me and said like, all right, this is your guitar now, you want to start playing, just start playing. And I play guitar by now. This is the way I relax, actually. But I cannot precisely say when I started writing music. There was a moment, and this is sort of important, there was a moment I was proposed, like there are a few friends of mine and my parents proposed me that maybe I would like to write a piece for a young composition competition this day. And I was like, all right, let's try, maybe this is a part of what I want to do. And I sent a piece there. That was the very first piece I sent. I was like 15, 16 years old, maybe more like 15. And I was not awarded with any sort of award, but there were some merits, some thing that it was actually noticed that there is sort of a good piece or something. Actually, I cannot say precisely what was good in it, because first I don't remember the piece, and secondly it was definitely not a very good quality of music in contemporary sense. But that was the very first time I thought to myself, all right, I can create some musical space. I can induce my, my thinking, my worldview about many things, my aesthetic that I was searching years before that. And maybe that's the way I can like settle some sort of soundscape just for myself. And that's the crucial decision, actually, the critical moment for me. At the same time, I was sort of psychologically obliged. I felt psychologically obliged to keep practicing viola, and I was, a few years after, I was decided to apply for becoming a student at the musical academy somewhere in Poland, and that was obvious for me that my future is viola. And some things happened that I came here to Warsaw with plan of becoming a student of both viola and composition. Another fate actually was, I perceived that as a problem these days, but after a year or two, it turned out that actually that's a quite fortunate situation for me, because I failed to I failed my first exam of viola. It was not a success at any rate, but I did become a student of the first grade of composition. So composition became my first thing that I started studying. And after a year, I enhanced my studying time with viola. So actually, I studied both viola and composition, and that's a very, very much fortunate circumstance. That's the way I perceive it now, because I was equally educated both in both sides of music, we can put it like. I was the one to create things as a composer. I was about to create my own soundscapes, my sceneries, but on the other hand, I was a performer. I did play viola in orchestras and string quartets as well, and I was quite close to what is actually quite real, quite technical. That also suggested many things about how to write music, especially for string instruments. If I want to search like deep inside me, so to say, it's like actually it's not composition. It's not the composition itself that I need to create. The very gist of the whole process is that I guess I can say I just love creating things, conceptualizing things. And composition and music, or just to put it generally, is not it's not the only area that I work. Maybe it's not very valuable to try to follow particular stages of what I wanted in my past to create, but among others, they were, for example, like creating languages, for example, or all that stuff that when you take a fantasy sword and sorcery book, like I don't know, Tolkien, for example, there is a map and there is a story behind it, and there are like races, all these humans, elves, and all that stuff. That was also a sort of an impulse for me, that there are worlds to be creating. If I do this properly, I mean, every particular molecule of the world would be created properly and put together with the others, we can say we have some sort of a world building actually. And we can translate these processes from music or from architecture to other areas, and in some sense they are actually quite the same. And one of the things that I still keep doing is creating languages, and that's another story. But language, when there is a zero language before starting, and after that you just start considering what is important part of the language, what sort of grammatical situation you would like to have, and what traits and characteristics the language you're about to create is going to have. This is quite similar to the way I work on music too. And if I'm an architect, or if I am which I'm not, a painter, I guess this process would sort of look quite similar. On the other hand, I wrote 3 novels, and I can say that if you're about to create some situation that would not have been existing without this creation, it's actually quite similar technical situation while you start creating a musical piece. So generalizing, I can say that on one hand, this is actually the music that I want to create, but on the other hand, maybe it doesn't sound really good, but I just like creating and designing things, for example. Whether you're, on one hand, maybe there are people who are actually sensitive, they like these things, and there are those who actually don't care about how tables are arranged in the room or something. So I belong to the first group. Whatever can be arranged, can be created in some area, it's of my liking to do so. As far as I know, David happened to listen to one of my piece of mine. It's called Lamentation, and the very atmosphere of the piece, which is quite long, it's actually like 70-something minute long. And it's built in a specific way because there is a vast space of music, because this is rather long and peaceful, of over 20-something minute, is repeated 3 times with slightly differentiated. And that was a part of the idea we made together with David. Actually, David asked me about trying to do some musical piece for Kronos Quartet, observing these rules but in a minimalized form. And this is actually, of course, it's not these initial Lamentations rewritten. Definitely, it's not. It's just a totally fresh, totally new piece. But there is some trait of atmosphere and musical situations, also dealing with matters of harmony and these things, that I sort of felt obliged to, or also invited to try to translate to the new circumstances, actually the string quartet circumstances. Due to the fact that I was educated, I was being educated as a musician like all my life long. There was just a subject like that, music history and all these things, and that was, I guess, the first circumstances that made me listen to string quartet. But on the other hand, as we remember that I was a student of first violin and then viola, string quartet wasn't actually a basic formation I took part in while being a student, and I remember I felt that string quartet is like a perfect formation for some sort of music. And in fact, I remember me searching for string quartet just to learn more of this, how it works. And it was like approximately at my 16, I was like 16 years old or something, I told myself that string quartet is it's like a chemical substance that needs to be observed, and there is a knowledge within it, something that you can learn or not learn, and since you learn this, you're just a better musician in some way. Of course, notwithstanding all those who may think different way, because there is any sort of instrumentarium can give you what you need while you're writing for something. But there's something in string quartet that made me feel that it's like a perfect somewhere I need to go. There was maybe not a breaking point, but a very important moment I remember while I was already a student, first or second grade. I happened to listen to Cram's Black Angels, a musical piece performed. The performance I heard was made by Kronos Quartet, which I actually didn't. I was not aware what it actually meant, but I remember I was very, very deeply impressed with this piece. It's not time for trying to explain all these situations, but of course we know that there is a string quartet actually being equipped with many other musical instruments and stuff, and it was we can say that I was perceiving music by that time as, you know, the score and performers coming to learn the score and then to perform it, and the score, the very paper on which the way the score is written in case of Black Angels, and the musical situation that is being produced by it, made me understand that I can actually go deeper, not only into the string quartet and actually what it is, but also it sort of made me, it pushed me for the next step of being a composer. And I remember I changed this time when I heard and I start observing, start searching what's actually in it, and it was a very special moment for me. It was like it took several months that I was like enchanted with the situation. I remember me deciding that to be a grown-up and adult composer, this is actually the perspective I may try just for initial part of it. I may try to take, just to broaden, just to invite my knowledge and the way I see things in these terms, and that was very, very important. So sort of a funny thing or interesting thing in it is that I'm here a part of the 50 for the Future project, which is the sort of a gist of what Kronos Quartet does nowadays after all these decades of activity. But actually, for me, it all started with Kronos Quartet too. Of course, not knowing all of them personally, not knowing what sort of a group this is. It was over 20 years ago now, and but that was a very, very important impulse for me. And asking for how a musical work is being created, it's a totally different question than, like, say, any circumstance, and every musical piece that we actually are after having created initially is a different process, in my opinion. That's what I can say. And sometimes it depends on the starting point, actually. Sometimes we're commissioned a piece, and there is some things, some information in the commission about what the piece is about to be or should be. And this is what I start with, actually, when this is done. On the other hand, we have all these ideas in our heads, and now I can say I have a sort of a register. It's like a computer memory when I try to file these ideas, and I use them as I need them. And which one is the one I need is actually a sort of a knowledge I have gained during my life so far. So this is actually very much similar to a journey for me. There's like a journey. Let's imagine that you have free time, you have like whatever money you need, and you look at the globe, you look at the map of the world, and you say, oh, this time maybe Patagonia or somewhere. So this is probably connected with the atmosphere, the mood, the sort of a landscape you need at one day, because there's no problem in terms of means of transportation in your dream. So you're just finding yourself in the Patagonia, and you take a travel, you take a journey through this, and this is how I actually associate the process of writing music as well. For me, it's a journey. I see things, I collect memories. Some things I perceive valuable, some things I just reject because I just don't like them. And the logbook, the memory of the journey after the time it has lost, it's just sort of a sketchbook for me to start writing a piece I wanted, because as I'm, for example, on this journey in Patagonia, so this is a Patagonia-like atmosphere, so to say, just for an example, just for instance. On the other hand, you can choose another part of word which is connected with your actual mood or what you think of word, what you need for yourself. Of course, geographical associations are not the only ones that you can take as an example, but it's quite useful association for me, because on the other hand, a landscape is an area, is a situation for a traveler that I find quite similar to the situation of mind of the person who listens to music. So what I can say is mostly in most frequent situation, a musical piece I write, I sort of plan to be able to be perceived as a sort of a journey. The way I perceive a listener while listening to music is the one who travels through a sort of a landscape, and this is me to make up this landscape and to create the traveler's moods and way of thinking. But this is the very individual part of it, what we think of the journey, and this is actually what a listener says, like after having listened to a piece, it was like something, I cannot actually name it, mostly we say, because music is like unnameable in a way, but in some sense, the way we try to explain things is quite similar if you're asked about, and how was it there, like during this journey, and this summer, this landscape you were traveling through. This is a sort of a question, and the mechanism of question and answer I do for myself while writing, and the mechanism that is probably being launched while listening, encoding this situation. It doesn't need to be literal, and the musical form, of course, it has to be the form of the journey, but the form of the landscape you're traveling through is not created by me. It's just the situation that is being created in people's mind. Maybe it sounds a little bit complicated, but this is the way I perceive it, and this is the reason I create things too. Just for the atmosphere of the traveler's association taken during the journey. That's quite important for me. The piece I wrote for Quartet for the Future project is a little bit over 10-minute long piece entitled Hilathi, and right after the first listening to the piece, we can say actually this is quite calm, quite peaceful and silent, and rather not very much active and aggressive piece. On the other hand, as we can detect quite clearly that there is a major-minor tonality being used there, nobody actually would maybe like to say it out loud, but there is some sort of opposition of, maybe not sadness, but nostalgia or something, and the opposite mood. And this is what I wanted to operate with. It's more of a piece for inviting to think a little bit deeper into some musical situations. It's not about technical effects. It's not about how technically skillful a string quartet should be to perform it after having practiced month long. It's more of a spiritual situation you may like to take while listening to it, or maybe even while practicing it, for it to be able to be performed. It's made of several. It's a one movement piece, but it's built of several stages, and it's also about to serve for this idea of journey. But this is more of a journey into some idea which is not clearly expressed. For example, not clearly expressed in the title. But actually, this is what I was trying maybe to achieve in terms of what the spiritual situation is one of the objectives of the piece. It's inviting for more profound, trying to invite for a more profound journey into some notions. I think I can say spiritual notions, because partly it's about the forgiveness, partly about our feeling of, after having done something wrong or good, we are equipped with some mechanisms to self-judge, to judge ourselves, to name the deed, to name what we have done, and this makes a human being actually, because we're spread between. We value things, and how we value, how we find ourselves in this, how we navigate through these things makes us a human being, and I found it quite important in terms of how we build ourselves within the world, and partly this is what the piece is about. On the other hand, we can call the piece more like sad than joyful, and it's about contemplation of some situations. I think this is what the performers and listeners of the piece named Hilathi, written for this 50 for the Future project, is about. There are some areas of creative work I do beside of composition, and beside of the work I'm at the duty I serve now as a vice rector of the musical university in Warsaw. I can say I used to write books, because there was a time it's over 8 years now that I haven't written any sort of letters. But I start collecting some ideas, so maybe another day when I'm more free, I start writing another thing. On the other hand, as I already said, I'm still very much fond of creating languages. It sounds a little bit juvenile in a way, maybe, for somebody, but what I want to stress, what I want to emphasize now is that creating a language is like constructing a very complicated machine or building. And the very work, the very situation you work on, and the sort of the bunch of knowledge you need to be able to use for it, which is actually a very specialistic and expert knowledge, which I gained during my lifetime. It's a simulation of a creating process that you can attribute to many other areas, and it's fascinating for me. So I can say this is where I create too. I'm not a performer. I don't use my viola. I haven't used it any longer since over 15 years. But I can say one day maybe I can take my viola again. But beside of that, this is what I actually sort of regret, that I don't play music. Actually, I don't perform it. But I remember how to do this, so maybe one day. That's not a very easy question. Of course, there is a message, but on the other hand, what I believe is that there is very much of adventure in our life, not adventure in this minor sense, like doing something for fun. Adventure, many circumstances we go through, they can be our allies and they can be our foes, and we have to still face them. And after some stage, after some part of the journey, we can say, I'm after that. I'm older. I'm better after this. And if there is a message, I would say, that's what the freedom is, to understand, and the way we may enjoy our personal freedom is the understanding that we are full of limitations, and within these limitations, and within the limitation that the world outside gives us, there is a fantastic journey to be taken, a fantastic adventure. I still think this is a proper word. And we have some stages, we have some sections to go by, and after finishing one section, we can sort of sum it up and say it was good. Maybe it was not just fun. Maybe it was not totally gloomy or something like that. It was just it. That was life, with all its difficult and good things. And partly this is what the Hilathi is about, but this is also the message for young people. You have to be good, and you have to feel good in terms of doing right things, but you're not always informed by what the right thing actually is. So let's feel free to take this knowledge from what we're being through in terms of world and life being perceived partly as a sort of a journey and maybe a part of adventure. I teraz jest prośba, żeby to powiedzieć po polsku. Ciężko jest przesłanie jednoznacznie określić, tym bardziej, że młodzi ludzie mają częściowo rację, sądząc, że sami sobie takie przesłania wymyślają i że sami wiedzą, co będzie dla nich najlepszą drogą, ale wziąwszy pod uwagę taki fakt finalny, że trzeba przeżyć życie będąc dobrym człowiekiem, nawet jeżeli w pośrednich etapach ma się na ten temat różne zdanie i różne rzeczy wyglądają na równie atrakcyjne, więc żeby to bezkolizyjnie przejść, wydaje mi się, że warto się zastanowić nad takim podejściem, żeby przeżywać te różne dobre i złe sytuacje, przez które się przechodzi i które się samemu też generuje jako rodzaj przygody czy podróży, ale niekoniecznie w takim sensie przygody radosnej, nie wiem, takiej tolkienowskiej, ale przygody w tym sensie, że uwarunkowania życia i trudy, jakie mogą nas spotkać, zarówno artystów, którzy są z definicji niejednokrotnie słusznie sądzą, że mają pogłębione podejście do świata, ale w ogóle jako człowieka, to jest taka sytuacja, żeby starać się, takie podejście, żeby starać się wyciągnąć jak najwięcej dobrego, zarówno z dobrych i łatwych rzeczy, jak i z trudnych. W takim sensie, że jak się umawiamy, że jedziemy na wycieczkę w góry i na zdjęciach było pięknie w tych górach, a po czym zrobi się fatalna pogoda, to żeby dalej z dumą i dobrym nastawieniem przez te trudy przejść i potem powiedzieć, ale było świetnie, było strasznie ciężko i było świetnie. I na końcu tego etapu stwierdzić, że na tym polega być może chwilowe zwycięstwo i że w możliwościach poruszania się po tej sytuacji tkwi w jakimś sensie wolność człowieka, a nie w tym, żeby na przykład stwierdzić, że skoro zaczęło padać, to uciekamy z tych gór i że takiego przykładowego wyzwania się nie podejmuje. Jest w tym dużo radości i powodów do zbudowania własnej wartości też, właśnie z tego podjęcia i przebycia jakiejś trudnej sytuacji, nawet jeżeli samemu się doprowadziło, czy było się częściowo składnikiem takiego trudu, czy przykrości, czy nawet może, tak powiedzieć, dobra i zła, ponieważ też jesteśmy w to zapleceni. No i ostatecznie, żeby do poszczególnych etapów tej podróży dochodzić z satysfakcją, że jesteśmy silniejsi, lepsi, nie dlatego, że udało nam się wybrać łatwiejszą drogę, tylko właśnie dlatego, że było ciężko, bo to jest część tego krajobrazu życiowego.